If you want your line work to look like this, perpendicular, super clean, very small close together wires, then you are going to have to start with this. Very easy, but I can teach you how to do it and we can get a good foundation for your skill set. First thing we're going to need are little tweezers, we're going to need clippers for the wire, 2 little pieces of wood. We'll need B7000 glue or an equivalent, and we will need our flat wire, and of course somewhere where you can put our little snippets of wire that we're not using, or we can save it for later. Whatever works. Not too difficult. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? First things first, we are going to make sure that our piece is taped down. So make sure your acrylic sheet, mine right here is 2 inches by 4 inches and it's 1/8 of an inch thick, or I believe 3 millimeters. Make sure it is taped to whatever your stencil of sorts is under it. And make sure that is also taped down to your board. That way when you turn it and work on top of it, it doesn't move, it doesn't shift. You can stay as consistent as possible. So right here is my flat wire. As you can see, it's a little kinked up, which is absolutely fine. It's kind of expected when you have a length of wire as long as this. I'm cutting it right here, so this is about 18 inches. Believe it or not, you will go through this wire way faster than you think, but you should still be able to get a good amount of these shapes done with that 18 inches of wire, as I'll show you later on. So when you do have kinks in it, you just use these 2 little flat pieces of spare wood and you flatten it out. Put a little bit of tension in between it and it'll straighten out before you know it. It's honestly not crazy strong. So, I mean, you can easily bend it and mangle it, twist it, but getting it straight tends to be a little bit more difficult to do. But you do want to make sure that the narrow part of your flat wire is what you are gluing to the base. I know it kind of sounds common sense because you're making cells, especially if you're doing non-traditional cloisonne. But just make sure you are working on the correct side of the wire so you don't like get through it and then realize that, wow, you've got nothing to really work with at that point. Also, check your ends, make sure that they are flat as well. You don't want anything that's kind of jagged. You want to keep everything perpendicular. That is going to be the easiest way to save you some heartache when you are working on these pieces, I promise you. Okay, first things first, we have our lovely little circle over here. So when you are applying glue, you don't need to overdo it. Honestly, it's just putting down a line of glue that is pretty much the width of whatever nozzle that you have on the glue itself. You don't want to have big old blobs. You also don't want it to have too thin to where like there's nothing to grab onto this piece of wire. It'll take you a little bit to kind of get used to the flow of whatever glue it is that you're using. And this is in real time too. So this is how long I usually wait before actually applying the wire. You will get used to that as well. Different glues and different glue widths will tend to have a different amount of time that you need to wait until the glue is tacky enough to adequately hold the wire. Otherwise it'll slide and move and shift while you're trying to bend it and place it, and trust me, it is a pain in the butt that you don't want to have to deal with. So right now I am working on the first initial curve of this circle. So there are some tricks with circles and I will walk you through those, of course. But this is how I usually check to see if it's ready. I'll tap it with my finger, and if there's no like actual residue, then I know like I'm pretty much good to go. But after that point, the working window is pretty small, so you really can't take forever on it. You have to find that sweet spot. But I do recommend holding down the initial base of that wire as long as you can before moving on. It does take a little bit of practice to be able to maneuver around a piece with a whole bunch of extra wire just chilling out, because it will get stuck on everything, whether it's your clothes, you know, the table, anything nearby, it'll hook on everything. So you can't fully see it, but what I'm doing with my tweezers is I have it on each side, so it's kind of straddling the wire at this point, and I'm tilting it to make it naturally curve into itself, without actually giving it a kink in the wire or bending it too much. I'm trying to like smooth into the curve. If it's a larger circle, sometimes you can do this with your finger. You can always wrap your wire around something like a pen. I've used like, you know, prescription bottles before, markers, stuff like that. That's always an easy way to make consistent circles. But when you are starting to close off that circle itself, one thing that is really helpful is if you do overlap. So you want to overlap that edge a little bit and then cut both pieces of wire. When you do this, it gives it a flat kind of edge to each side that will line up. And that's really important because if you're filling this with resin, resin is technically a liquid. And if there's a gap between your wire, or if like the bottom part of it touches and the top part doesn't, or vice versa, it will leak out. And that is not a fun thing to deal with, and it will add a ton of time to your processing when you are in the painting stages of non-traditional cloisonne. It just gets really difficult if you don't, I guess, be as particular as you can on the front end. So at this point, the circle is closed, and I'm going to go ahead and flatten it out with the little piece of wood. So the reason that I do this is so there is as much contact with that edge of the wire and your base as possible. That is incredibly important. If the wire is vertically, I guess, wavy, you're going to have leaks down the sides, down every angle, and even if like the horizontal sides line up well together, you still have a vertical that you need to think about. So this is not necessarily a two-dimensional art form. You have to think of working with wire as three-dimensional because you do have to deal with liquid and making sure that things are, I don't want to say leak tight, because technically speaking on a scientific level, leak tight has different things that it has to pertain to. But you don't want it to leak at all. It's going to save you time and energy and materials if you can figure out how to make it not leak, right? So now at this point, I have fast forwarded some of this because you've seen how long it actually takes to put some wire down and make sure that it's glued well. This is a very lengthy, time-consuming process. So I hope you have very high patience and you don't need necessarily immediate rewards, because you're gonna be waiting it out for a little bit, I promise you. But that's totally fine too. So right here we got this little oval going, and now we're working on a square too. So rule of thumb, when you are doing cloisonne and you are starting your wire work, it's easier to start in the center of your piece and slowly work your way out to the edge. Obviously this is a very small piece, so we don't really have to worry about that. But you'll see it when I get to the star. It's just really easy to get your wire stuck on all of the wire that you've previously put down. And the other thing too is the glue that you use. It takes a while for it to set. Sometimes it's a few hours, and for it to fully cure, that could be like a day. So when you are working close to things that you've just put down, it's very easy and possible for you to accidentally either bend a wire or remove it from the glue, slide it over, something like that. So you do have to be careful and delicate with the work that you've already put down. It's a thing, but it's so fun. I promise. You just gotta trust me, okay? So fundamentally, making wire work isn't difficult to do, and putting wire down on a piece of acrylic, it's not hard. It's just this medium is however hard and difficult you want it to be. You can make some wonderfully elaborate pieces that are just beautifully stunning, but it's gonna cost you time and energy. And you gotta be aware of that up front. Making bangers and like pieces that you're super, super proud of, like some of my original pieces are really large, and some of them have taken me over 4 months to complete. So this is just, be patient with yourself. It's a slow mover of sorts. So right here, I'm working on a star. Stars are interesting. So there is a trick that you can do with your tweezers, and I just did it. I know it's hard to like catch it because it's, the angle of the camera, but you kind of straddle the wire again with your tweezers, but then you twist the tweezers as a whole while making sure that you put enough pressure on the wire that has already been glued down so that it doesn't shift, and it creates a sharper point at your angle. So instead of having more of a rounded out edge, like at your point, it's gonna be a pretty good pointy point, if that makes any sense. I mean, I'll show you guys later too. So after I'm done filling in all of these shapes and sorts, I'll zoom in on it so you can see like what it looks like when you have your wire completely put down flat and, you know, all that stuff. How to close off shapes. You'll see it, I promise. I'm not gonna leave you hanging and to like struggle bust it by yourself. And of course, that being said, if you guys have any questions over any of the materials, any of the little techniques that I'm doing, or you want me to show you something in more depth, please let me know in the comments, because it is the easiest way for me to know what things I did not cover well enough. And I can go into more depth, you know, later on. I would love to be able to help you guys out as much as I can, considering I pretty much had to raw dog this all by myself for the past 5 years, and it was really difficult to kind of learn from the whole process. It was really hard. This stuff does not necessarily come easy. So it's a lot of work, and it's mainly learning your materials and how they work best. So one of the things, for example, that I would recommend, if you are going to be working on a medium like this and working in very close quarters, aka very small shapes, I would not have extremely long nails, because it makes it really hard to hold down your wire, believe it or not. And then you have to work around your own fingers in order to make sure that this wire is glued properly. And it can be a little bit of a catch-22, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, so now we are about to get into the lines. Just the plain Jane lines. I am cutting more wire because I don't know for certain I will have enough. So right here, you can see that I'm trying to correct a bend that's in this wire, and it was a vertical bend, so it would be one that would really affect resin. So I just cut it out because I've got more than enough wire to do that with, and it makes it way easier. So do it. Definitely don't be afraid to cut your wire in order to make your life easier. So right here we have this little like zigzag squiggle. Also check your scissors and your tweezers for extra glue residue, because it will be everywhere. When I say everywhere, I mean it'll be all over you, it'll be all over the table, it will be all over your tweezers and other materials. So just try to keep it clean if you can. But by no means do you have to like scrape it off of pieces of the acrylic. It would just, it's not worth your time, I promise. Most of that will get covered up by the resin anyway. So the first spot on this curve is annoying. And the reason why it's annoying is because I am trying to anchor this wire, and there's immediately a bend in it, which makes it hard to hold down the wire while bending the additional wire to make the next bend. So once it gets going and more pieces of it get put down, you will see that it will go faster and easier. That's typically the case when you are applying wire to anything, so don't get yourself beat up over that first little nub of sorts. That's usually why I wait a little bit to make sure that the glue is actually ready to hold the wire before I start, because otherwise it's just sliding and it's a pain in the butt. But with this right here, so you can either use the tweezers in order to achieve your small curves, or you can use your finger. If you have very dexterous hands, that works absolutely fine as well. Like, this is one of those mediums where as long as it gets there, you're good. And then make sure you flatten that down too. So every single curve on this line is a potential leak point. I know, right? You have to continuously worry about leakage. Who thought, right? Of course, I worry about that kind of stuff a lot, but I've dealt with this a lot. So this is a very teeny squiggle squaggle. Why have I decided it's a squiggle squaggle? Because I've been doing voice-over work for this video for the past 15 minutes, and my brain is a little bit fried. This is so much fun. I love these. But as you see, like, half of it lifts up right off the bat, and then I have to re-anchor it, and try it again. And then I will have to re-anchor this little piece, like, I don't know, 5 times before I get it to actually like stay put and stay grounded. But that's okay. Like I said, like this is just one of those mediums you have to be very patient and give yourself some grace. Like put on a podcast and just zone out and just do your thing. If I had $1 for every F-bomb I dropped while making a Cloisonne piece, oh my gosh, I would be a millionaire. Also, if I had $1 for every time I hit my head on the camera while I was trying to film, I would also be doing very, very well right now. That happens a lot more than you would think. It's just, making this piece, it's a very vertical thing. Like, you have to kind of look directly down upon it. And when there's a camera in the way, it makes it really hard. But yeah, so here's your little squiggle. You cut the piece off on the side. So when you are done with your line and you are snipping it, right? And this is a great example just because it's the edge of a piece. I usually recommend not trimming it super close to the piece right away until it's like fully dry. That way it just anchors better to your resin and you don't have to worry about like overcutting it, cutting it too short, stuff like that. So just give yourself a little bit of leeway at first, and then when you're completely done with all of your wire work on the whole entire piece, that's usually when I go back around and cut those smaller pieces on the edge in order to put my my border wire on. And we'll get to that too in the end. So right here is our sharp edge zigzag, and I'm doing that little trick that I told you about with the star to get more of a sharper edge with it. So I'm turning the wire with the tweezers instead of moving the wire around the tweezers, if that makes sense. I hope it does. I don't know. I'm not a wire doctor. I only have the words that come into my noggin, and a lot of times those words don't make sense to anyone but me, and that's okay. Or at least I tell myself that it's okay, so you know, it is what it is. But yes, when you're done, always flatten it down. This curvy, like this gentle curve wire, I will use my hands for to make that bend. It's a lot easier to make gentle bends that look more natural when you're using your hands versus tweezers. Tweezers, you're more apt to get a sharp edge, if that makes sense too. It's just, sometimes you'll kink it. If you pinch the wire too hard, you can make it to where you just need a whole new piece of wire. You can mangle that thing. And it happens every once in a while. Don't beat yourself up over it. This piece tries to get away from me because I tried to glue it down too early. So there would probably be an F-bomb right about here if I do know myself, which I like to think that I do. This next piece of wire is a deceptive one, and I'm gonna let you know why. So it is just a straight line. Now you'd think this would be the easiest one to put down, right? You really don't have to do anything to it, it's just straight. Well, this is why it's hard. It's because you are dealing with a three-dimensional space, right? So when you have a curve, it's a lot easier to maintain your verticals. When it is just a flat wire, it can literally just flip to the side on you, and if it gets too much glue on one of the sides, even if you try to make things perpendicular to your base again, it might pull to one side or the other because of that. So you'll have to decide the best way to kind of approach that when the time comes. Everyone kind of has their own ways around it, but if you do let it pull in one direction or the other, like if there's too much glue, let's say on the left side, when you do fill the resin in, it could completely cover your wire and you may lose it, which will be no bueno. You don't want that at all. So right here, I'm doing the little snippets on the edge. I'm also gonna overcut one of them. That way I can show you when it comes to the resin time, what happens when there is a leak and how to go about fixing it. I didn't want to make this completely perfect because it's a practice piece, right? And also we can use this piece to practice our resin and to do a few tests. If you haven't worked with resin before, it can be a little tricky, and hopefully I can help you maneuver it in a way that, you know, doesn't make you go insane. So this is it from the angle, right? You can see that everything is flat. All the cells are looking pretty freaking solid. Honestly, I just think working in wire is just freaking awesome. So that circle on the edge, you can see there's a little white coming through it. It's still closed enough where it should be fine and it shouldn't leak, but if there was any gap larger than that, then it would. So right here is my 2mm kind of border wire, and there are 2 sides to it. So one is finished, one is not. I would not recommend sliding your hand quickly over it because one side is slightly rougher than the other and it could cut your skin. Believe it or not, I've done it a few times. Oh my gosh. But you're gonna want to press the wire as straight as possible. You don't want to have any gaps because when you glue everything in, like this is gonna stop all your resin from pouring out your sides. So I'm using the larger glue nozzle on this because I do want more coverage, and I'm placing that glue on the the top third of that edge. I'm not going all the way to the bottom, and I will show you why in a second. I'm also making sure that this is as flat as possible. Because it is the first side, you don't really have to worry about the edges of it because you just kind of overshoot both sides of it and build off of that. Press it with the wood, make sure it is flat and good. So when you use the wood on the top of it, you go over your line work, it'll make sure that the edge border is at the same height as your initial wiring. And that's like the best thing ever because it makes your life so much easier when it goes forward to doing the other sides of the border as well. So here I am cutting the shorter side, and I am checking the edge to see if it's actually like 90 degrees because it's really easy to cut these at an angle on accident. And I'm sure you'll see me do that because there's one of them where I just had the hardest time cutting a straight line to save my life. And there's just little shards of pieces of wire everywhere. Other thing too, whenever you are snipping your wire, do not leave any little shrapnel behind. No itty bitty little pieces. You may think that it is like a sliver of metal. Get rid of it because when you put resin in there, all of those little flaws and everything, they will rise up and bite you in the butt. You don't want them there, trust me. So now I'm pressing it against the side, making sure that the angles are perpendicular and that it's also flat and level with the design wire. And we are doing the third side. I think this is the one that I botched. Yeah, this is my my little struggle bus. I'm cutting little pieces. I think at one point, yeah. I don't even know how many times I tried this. I mean, I could count, but I'm not going to because it's embarrassing, okay? Your girl can't cut 90 degrees to save her life, and that's fine. Because you know what else I can do? A bunch of other things that are pretty cool, okay? I can't cut 90 degrees, but I'm a nice lady, okay? So yeah, I'm gonna do the same glue, the same thing. Make sure this is all straight as possible, and get everything pressed into place. So when we do this last side, we do have to make sure to snip the first wire that we did and make sure that it is flat with the acrylic so that it creates a really nice border, and I have strong edges and stuff like that. Like, you just don't want any gaps if you can avoid it. And then also, we will be doing some additional gluing after this step too, and don't worry, I will show you that as well. Okay, now I'm cutting down this edge over here to make sure that everything is okay. Make it as flat to the acrylic as you can, but try not to overcut it too. Because if you do, then you'll get a gap. And it's kind of like the same issue that I've been kind of screaming from the mountaintop. I don't know. I'm slowly losing my marbles. This is a long video for me. Oh my gosh. Not only did it take me an hour 15 to actually make this thing, start to finish, but then I had to edit it down into 27 or so minutes and then do the voiceovers on it. Oh my gosh. By the way, I do have the little pattern for my stencil in my Ko-fi shop, in my art shop, in the link in my bio. So you can download that for free if you want to go ahead and use it, or you can do whatever you want. You can add to it, you can make whatever design you feel that is a good idea. But I honestly recommend starting with this. That way you get used to making edges, making round things, making lines and squiggles. Trust me, it's just a good idea. Hey, that's my head. Oh my gosh. I didn't even realize my noggin made it in there. That's great. I'm perfect. So here I'm showing you that all of the edges are done. Now we go in with the glue. So we are gonna glue around every perimeter of every wire. And you want to do it at like a 45-degree angle. You don't want to overglue it. You just want enough to make a small barrier. Think about like if you are caulking your bathroom, right? You just want that little bit of an edge to help protect from leakage. So on the round items, or I guess on angles that are greater than 90 degrees, I tend to use the glue on the inside of the shape. But on things like the star, where obviously you've got some acute angles in there, it's a little bit more difficult. So I'll tend to do those from the outside if there's room. But it really is going to depend on your design where you have to work around. There's also one line that I don't glue, and I'll explain that why in a second. So overall, these curves are a little bit more tricky to glue, but I mean, it's doable. You just want to make sure that you've got a good boundary for if you decide to do different colors, right? So the one that I missed was the one shortly before this, the very tight squiggle, because it wouldn't make sense to really do that with the glue. There's just not enough space, and it could pull up the glue in a way that would make it very difficult for the resin to actually bond to it. And then you also make sure that you press everything down. If you apply glue too soon after you did your design, it could actually lift up the previous glue. It's kind of like adding nail polish to wet nail polish. It could actually like pull it off. But yeah, you want to make sure you do the outer perimeter as well. And if you are feeling kind of like sketched out by the outer perimeter, you can always glue it from the bottom side as well, if that'll give you some more peace of mind. But if there are two areas on this piece that are most likely going to leak, it'll be the straight edge, because I made it intentionally to leak, because I cut it short so I can show you that. And also the squiggle without the additional reinforcement of the glue. So in the next video, when we are doing resin work, I will show you what happens and you'll be able to see it. So this is what it looks like when it is fully glued. It looks a little bit more messy, right? You kind of have more going on. This is it from the back. But yeah, that's it. Pretty simple, right?